fast fashion industry. Alrighty, so most of us shop at places like Target, H&M, Topshop, Forever 21, American Eagle, Hollister. I know you shop at Dress Barn. Those are just a couple of places. Walmart, did I say Walmart? Okay, all these popular stores are some of the most common fast fashion retailers today. So fast fashion is the term used to refer to cheaply produced popular fashion that is produced in high volume with fast retail turnover. So these clothes are produced cheaply. They have a cheap price. Thus, they're made cheaply, produced cheaply, cheap in general. And these clothes are created and sold to consumers with the intention of going in style and out of style within the matter of a couple weeks. So this fast fashion cycle, it's kind of a cycle, and I'll explain that later, is it raises many concerns about ethical labor and global sustainability. So I'm going to generalize fast fashion into three sections for the purposes of the speech. First is the designer and the lack of intellectual property rights granted to the fashion designers themselves, the manufacturer, exploitative labor, and environmental harm of the industry, and then the consumer and the consumer's impact. So where does the cycle begin? On the runway. It begins in places where there's Fashion Week in cities such as Milan, Istanbul, Berlin, London, Paris, New York. You've heard of this Fashion Week. You see it a lot of times on social media such as Instagram and Snapchat, and these social media sites kind of foster this obsession in the consumer to have these styles that they see on the streets, and the retailers take advantage of this. So Marie Claire editor Laura Cullen describes Fashion Week as the single most significant event in the fashion industry because it paves the way for the season's hottest designs and inevitably what is sold to consumers. So Cassandra Elrod, a global property rights attorney, described in her investigative study of the fast fashion industry the way designs are copied from designers on the runway and taken overseas to manufacturing companies where the replicas are created cheaply and then sold to consumers en masse in the US. So this process is only increased with the development and improvement of technology, and unfortunately, due to the lack of intellectual property rights granted to the fast fashion industry, this process is entirely legal. So you see things like the logos on Louis Vuitton handbags, the VL, you see the Gucci red and green, you see like I think the Coach had that logo all over sneakers and handbags. So these are logos, or as Cornell law defines them, trademarks. These are the only type of intellectual property rights designers can really use. Patents are not viable because frequent style changes of fashion means that there's little time or money to actually apply for patents. And then, according to Cornell law, again, designers aren't even allowed to apply for copyright protection because clothing is still considered a useful article, meaning that it's something that's used every day. And copyright's only allowed to cover actual designs. So you could copyright a logo, like you see Levi's has the little C in the circle in it. That's a copyright. So moving on to the manufacturer, copy designs are taken from the runways where they're copied from designers. I'm sorry, that was redundant. To overseas garment factories for mass production. So the manufacturing sector has a significant human rights and environmental impact. So sweatshop is the term used to refer to these places where backtracking. Sweatshop, as defined by Linda Golodner, who is President Emeritus of the National Consumers League, which is kind of a big deal, is the term used to describe manufacturing facilities often found in developing countries where laborers work long hours in hard and dangerous conditions for very, very, very low wages in order to keep up with the demands of us, the consumers. So these inexpensive production costs mean that prices are low for manufacturing and companies have a huge profit margin. So these low prices are a result of the minimal, if any, governmental regulations, which means dangerous things such as environmental disasters and manufacturing disasters. So the Rana Plaza building collapse in April of 2013 is the worst known industrial disaster in history. And basically there was no regulations to ensure the safety of the building, and over 1,000 people died and about 2,500 were injured. So the workers of the sweatshops are abused and mistreated. They have long working hours. Very few are actually paid the wage to, very few are actually paid a working wage to let me put it this way. they're not paid a sufficient enough wage to live. Um, there is also a huge instance of slave labor in the fast fashion industry. So Free the Slaves, which is an organization dedicated to finally ending global slavery, says that of the 40 million slaves globally, 50% are in labor slavery in these sweatshops. Also, there is a large number of children that are exploited in the fast fashion industry. So Patrick Ogren, who is a professor of ethics at UV University in Amsterdam, says that in a study in child labor, there was a clear link between low wages for adult workers and the prevalence of child labor in these countries where workers do not earn enough to meet the family's basic needs. So children are there to work and compensate for that lack of wage. Alright, cheap costs also stem from the environmental concerns. So production of garments from harvest and synthesis of materials to creation and dyeing of textiles generate many environmental hazards. Researchers at the University of Oxford textile industry say that the textile industry is responsible for 20% of global water pollution. That's a lot of water pollution. Textile dyeing, treatment, and synthetic chemicals used to turn raw materials into textiles produces lots of harmful things like acid gases, and that's with the creation and dyeing of both synthetic and natural materials. Cotton is a major part of the fast fashion industry, lots of textiles made of cotton. The U.S. is still one of the largest producers of cotton globally, and the USDA says that cotton production accounts for 25% of all the pesticides used in the U.S. and accounts for 3% of global water consumption. That's just not in the U.S., it's globally. And then polyester, another really popular fiber used in fast fashion, requires an energy-intensive process, and it requires thousands of gallons of crude oil and releases harmful gases. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it actually has more harmful gases than car emissions and like train emissions combined. And the EPA considers the production of polyester to be one of the most hazardous waste generators globally. So lastly, the garment, once it is produced and brought over and sold to consumers, has another negative impact on the environment once in the hands of the consumer. So according to the EPA, the average American generates 82 pounds of clothing and textile waste per year. This amounts to 11 million tons of textile waste globally, that for like all of the US. So every American put together, we all generate 11 million tons of textile waste. So how does this happen? Well, the clothes are made cheaply. They break. Once they break, they can't be worn. Once they're broken and can't be worn, it would cost more money to alter and repair the garment than it would to just throw it away. So what do? We throw it away. This is why fast fashion has been dubbed waste couture, because it has fostered this mentality that things are expendable. So it's so cheap, so we can just easily replace it, so we throw it away. So Linda Golodner, who, as I mentioned, is President Emeritus of the National Consumers League, described modern-day consumerism as being shaped by the fast fashion industry. Consumers produce cheap goods in order to achieve the newest Consumers purchase these cheap goods in order to achieve the newest trends. So this means the accelerated turnover of goods and, as I mentioned, the throwaway mentality. So you could think of like thrifting, like donating clothes to thrift stores. Even then, when they filter through the clothes at thrift stores, they still throw them away. There's so many things that get thrown away at Goodwill and Salvation Army because they're not really usable. And then they end up like overseas getting burned again in landfills and such. Moving on, actually in conclusion, the fast fashion industry raises many concerns for global sustainability and the livelihood of human laborers. There are issues with the fast fashion industry in the sense of intellectual property rights. There's none granted to the designers. The manufacturing processes produce harmful gases and raise lots of labor concerns. And then consumerism is another big issue with the fast fashion industry, which kind of shapes the way that the cycle goes. The cyclical nature of the fast fashion industry each has its own solution. That's a whole other speech. There's a whole list of solutions to that. And then basically the main idea of this speech was that as a consumer you can be more aware of the things that you're purchasing and how it affects the globe, quite honestly. And then yeah, it's really important. You as a consumer, really aware. So thank you. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, what can we do as a consumer to help with this issue?
You can choose to purchase more ethically, so you buy higher quality garments. You look at the companies of the garments that you're buying and say, hey, are these garments quality? How are they made? Are they being transparent about their manufacturing? So,
okay. Is there anything in particular that we should look for when we're purchasing garments? I
Um,
mean,
I wouldn't. You see like the made in China and the made in USA. You can't really trust those tags as much because they're not necessarily good indicators. You can purchase from companies that clearly state that they're ethical. They're ethical companies. You'll know that they're ethical. They'll say it. For example, Everlane is an ethical company that produces clothing that is not fast fashion.
is there any kind of department store brand out there that, or is it like totally online?
It's I'm not personally aware because I thrift shop. So I choose to thrift shop because I know that the clothing's not getting thrown away. What I'm buying, it's being reused. It's given another life. Even if it was a fast fashion garment, before I purchased it, I know that it's being given another life. So it's not going entirely to waste. Department store brands, I think it depends on the specific brand. You have to like look into that name brand, like does this designer produce ethically or not. I know Levi's went through a small phase where they were like, hey, let's be more transparent. Let's have less carbon footprint from our factories, but it hasn't lasted, and still the company remains very non-transparent. Yes.
Why should we as consumers care? What, besides the main overlapping theme of unethical, what is the personal benefits we would get being ethical that say we might be enjoying in years?
Your pants are Under Armour, and they're probably $60 pants. The technology's really good, but you can't trust that they were made quality. So as a consumer, you want to know that if you're paying, so not all fast fashion is necessarily dirt cheap. Relatively it is, but it's not all dirt cheap. Like Forever 21 prices, like you pay like $60, $70 for a pair of Under Armour pants that were sold that were sewed together in a sweatshop in Asia, and you don't know what kind of quality had been put into them. So you don't know.
And so you're saying if you buy ethical, you know the
It's
quality?
quality, yes. That's definitely one of the big things. Knowing that it's not going to break in 2 years. Yes.
Is there any of the major mainstream brands that produce ethical clothing?
Not that I know of. Most of the mainstream brands are really big on consumerism, so they're going to produce as cheaply as possible to get as large of a profit margin as possible, and that means sweatshop labor.
And what about pricing? Or is ethical clothing more expensive? I mean, you go to the grocery store to buy organic, and it's a lot more expensive. I mean, does that generalize to ethical fashion as well?
In some cases, yes, but if you're not, again, it depends on if you're comparing it specifically to like a fast fashion brand, it depends on the fast fashion brand you're buying. So I keep going back to Forever 21 because I know it's a very popular like brand. It's something that people use a lot. And Zara is also something that's known to break and be like poorly made in some cases. And you're paying less for those clothing, but it shows in the construction and it shows when you wear it. So let's say that you're buying fast fashion that is comparable in quality to an ethically made piece of clothing. It depends on the ethical brand as it does the fast fashion brand. So each one has different levels and standards for quality. So for an example, an ethical company such as Everlane, they produce affordable ethical basics. So their jeans are going to run about $6 to $8 a pair. Levi's, which is a fast fashion brand, is going to be the same quality, essentially the same quality. I mean, there's obviously differences in the manufacturing, but it's going to